Well, good morning, everyone. My name is David Duplessis, and I'm the CEO of the St. John Region Chamber of Commerce. And it is my pleasure to welcome everyone here this morning. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Mon nom c'est David Duplessis, et je voudrais souhaiter bienvenue à tous. My pleasure to welcome you all here today to our Distinguished Speaker Series featuring Honourable Blaine Higgs, the Premier of New Brunswick. I would also have a special welcome to Minister Arlene Dunn, who's with us today. We also have the Chair of our board, Deirdre Wade, the Vice Chair, Dean Mullen, as well as a number of different board members, Ray Robinson, Mike Corbett, as well. Extend a special welcome to Derek and Andrew Oland, who are with us today. Sherry Somerville, CEO at the Atlantic Chamber of Commerce, as well as representatives from the Chaleur Chamber of Commerce as well. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we start. We ask that you do click on your mute button to minimize any background noise, and we'll also provide you with an opportunity to ask questions at the end of this session if the time permits. If you have any questions, simply use the chat box on the bottom of your screen to submit. I'd also like to acknowledge our sponsors, Stuart McKelvey, Emera New Brunswick, the University of New Brunswick St. John MBA program, Economic Development of Greater St. John, and RBC Royal Bank of Canada. We really are truly grateful for their tremendous support of all of our sponsors as they've enabled us to pivot and to adapt to the new normal of connecting and carrying out our business functions online. Again, I would like to acknowledge our co-hosts this morning, Chamber Partner Sherry Somerville, as well as Julie Panette with the Chaleur Chamber of Commerce. I would like to now introduce Premier Blaine Higgs, who will take a few moments to introduce Minister Arlene Dunn as well. Blaine Higgs is a member of the Legislative Assembly for Quispamsis, was born in Woodstock, New Brunswick. He graduated from UNB with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering. In 1993, he completed the Executive Management program at Queen's University and has also taken numerous finance courses in 2003 and Leadership and Influence at Babson Executive Training and Education in 2006. First elected to the Legislative Assembly on September 20th, 2010, he represents the riding of Quispamsis, and on October 12th, 2010, he was sworn in as Minister of Finance, Minister responsible for the New Brunswick Liquor Corporation, Minister responsible for New Brunswick Investment Corporation, Minister responsible for New Brunswick Lotteries and Gaming, and the Chair of the Board of Management. He's also served as Minister of Human Resources until October 9th, 2012. Mr. Higgs was re-elected to the Legislative Assembly on September 22nd as MLA for Quispamsis. In 2016, he was elected leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, and on September 24th, he was re-elected for a third time as MLA for Quispamsis. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Premier Higgs.
Thank you, David. Merci. Et bonjour à tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. Merci de votre leadership pendant la pandémie de COVID-19 et merci de nous aider à protéger notre population. It's great to be here today. You know, this is certainly a new time for us all, and here I am standing in the office and online, which we've been doing now for months. So it seems like this is a way of life, not a COVID way. I want to say thank you initially to each and every one of you for your role you've played to help keep us safe, to keep your workers safe, to follow the rules that we've laid out, working with public health, because we're so close to the finish line. There's been lots of talk of a vaccine. And, you know, if you think back a few months ago, we were talking about, when would we see a vaccine? When is it coming? And now there are 7 actual suppliers, 4 of which are very prominent in being able to supply early in the new year or in the coming weeks. And so now the conversation has shifted as to when will I get mine? So if I asked here for a show of hands, how many want a vaccine first? I often wonder what the numbers might be like. So I won't ask, but it's like, we will have plenty of vaccines, I think, in the coming months. I related my own personal experience thinking back to those of you that might remember Y2K. You remember how everything was going to shut down and we were all going to fall apart when the century changed to 2000. There was a lot of hype leading up to that. I think we're going to see a lot of vaccines. Yes, it could be a little tight initially, but we hope to be, there will be plenty of vaccines available. We've been told we will get roughly 60,000 units for patients. and that will start early in the new year. So that's good news coming out of a pandemic. I certainly want to welcome Minister Dunn being with me here today. Minister Dunn has deep experience in labor relations and business, tremendous asset to our government team. She has a significant portfolio. David, you were reading off what mine was when I first went into government. So I was new into the government world and coming from my previous 2 months retirement, and I got right into politics. And so I had quite an extensive portfolio. So Minister Dunn is certainly up to the task and has a similar opportunity here for many areas. So she has indeed hit the ground running. So Minister Dunn, if you're there right now, maybe I could just ask for your comments.
Well, thank you, Premier. I appreciate those kind words. And it is always great to be able to share some time, even if it is virtually, with our key partners. I know everyone is busy, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I did want to highlight a few very important elements of the updated mandate of Opportunities New Brunswick. We certainly want to focus on productivity and innovation. We want to close the gap between New Brunswick and the rest of Atlantic Canada, because doing so is the equivalent of adding nearly $3 billion to the New Brunswick economy, if you can imagine that. Many New Brunswick businesses are doing exciting work on the innovation front, and we want to encourage even more work on productivity and innovation in the future. In almost all meetings with the business community, the conversation eventually turns to ensuring that we have a very skilled workforce available for the future. It's been estimated that 120,000 jobs will become available in the next decade. We must bring New Brunswickers home, and we must attract newcomers to address this gap. We have pivoted our immigration efforts and our international recruiting strategies to include the use of virtual spaces to effectively promote New Brunswick as one of the best places in the world to live and grow your business or your career. We're also working to make sure that we maximize the benefits of immigrant investors. We want them to grow their businesses and to stay here. And we also know that we need to do all we can to encourage growth in the private sector. We'll continue our efforts to ensure an appropriate talent pool is available and work to make the business climate more competitive. Then we'll get out of the way and we'll let business do what they do best, and that is to take the lead. There's so much to say, and I know that despite COVID, there's plenty of optimism and enthusiasm in our business community. I look forward to engaging with you further in the coming weeks and months. And as you know, if you've been reading the Telegraph Journal, our Premier is very, very popular. So I don't want to cut into his time. So I'm going to let the Premier take it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Dunn. I appreciate your comments, but we know this political popularity thing's a fleeting moment. So I never take a whole lot of solace in that. But nevertheless, we'll keep forging ahead. So I guess when we think about the business's impact this year and what that means, each of you have felt it personally. Some businesses have actually done very well during this pandemic and have seen, unprecedented market, support. But I know that others, it's been very different. But our whole focus continues to be back on the growth agenda, where we were when we presented the state of the province back in January, pre-COVID. And then the comparators that I'm about to show you are ones that were prior to the COVID experience and prior to that hitting in March. As you know, likely New Brunswick has fared better than most. And so that's been attributed to the diligence of our people, the resilience of our healthcare workers, following public health rules. I know that of late there's been some sensitivities around our enforcement program. And I don't apologize for that, simply because we've tried to balance in relation to people being able to continue to stay open but do it in a different way. And we saw, unfortunately, some outbreaks that were really far outreaching of the rules that happened in St. John, actually, in about 3 weeks ago. And that kind of spread to the other urban centers. And so we've been dealing with that. And I'd like to say, right here now that we feel that's under control. We feel that our numbers will come down. We're seeing about 5 or 6 a day at this point, and they're spread out with travel related. So it's not a something that we can't manage and we'll have as long as we have COVID. Je sais que certaines entreprises continuent de souffrir. Notre gouvernement a mis en place plusieurs mesures de soutien. Mais aujourd'hui, je veux parler à la croissance à l'heure actuelle. Le Nouveau-Brunswick se porte mieux que la plupart des autres provinces canadiennes. I have a dashboard there, David. I think you're going to put up a slide for me and I'll walk through it.
Yes, coming up. Just one moment.
Thank you. So what I asked of our department was basically give me some economic indicators that I can track with the rest of the country. Because everyone has a philosophy that, you know, well, if you spend more money, I say everyone, I know that the audience I'm talking to today doesn't feel that way, but in many audiences, well, if we just put more money into something, it'll get better. I've never quite shared that philosophy. I like to know that the money being spent is actually getting results. So what I'm going to walk through here, starting up in the upper left-hand corner, are the economic recovery dashboard that we track. And so if we're looking at the employment, the seasonally adjusted employment, we'll see that we are currently running about 97% of the level of employment seen in February earlier this year. So we had reached at that point a 10-year high with 361,000 New Brunswickers employed. And this is compared to about the 4th most complete in job recovery in the country. We're behind 3 other provinces, Manitoba, Quebec, and Saskatchewan, but all within very close ranges. The last 3% of jobs will be likely the toughest, but we also know the challenges we're facing. Many companies have told me over and over about difficulty getting employment and employees. The CERB program, although very certainly useful at the time, has caused a difference in focus of returning to work or not returning to work. But also, as we see the federal support wind down, now I know it's going to continue for a bit longer, as we saw from the economic update, but that's going to be what we may see a step change in some of the numbers I'm presenting. But looking at the employment stats, we're doing quite well and certainly doing well compared to the rest of the country. The other item that, and if I go to the bottom left-hand slide on insolvencies, so, you know, we often hear, well, companies are going out of business in record numbers. And yes, we may have some cases where you all could point to a company that has changed, but in fact, our insolvency rate is lower right now than it has been previously. So compared to 2019, we're at about 66% of the September 2019 level compared to where we are now in 2020. So it doesn't indicate more people are going insolvent. It's actually less. So we continue to track that and will through the entire pandemic. But again, it's when someone asks a question of me or department or Mr. Dunn in relation to business, it's okay, let's look at the facts and let's understand that. The barometer for CFI business, which you would all be familiar with, the center upper column business barometer. So that's kind of a, you know, stating right now that is tracking with our real GDP growth, but it is about 85%. So the expectations in New Brunswick are now slightly above where they were the same time in 2019. And this, you know, I'd like to say is there is an increased optimism, which we've seen more of late in the last 3 or 4 months. So I'll talk about that as I go through here, but what's exciting to me and something that really bothered me, you know, it's one thing if we want to talk about ourselves, but I don't like other people talking about us and what we can't do here in New Brunswick. And usually if someone tells me, I remember one of my most motivational teachers was one who told me I couldn't do something. And that's all I needed to hear. And that just set me off like, okay, well, we'll fix that. Because we were told, I remember Globe and Mail articles that said a few years ago that would say, well, whatever New Brunswick is doing the opposite. You know, they're not saying that now. I think we've got a renewed level of pride in our province. And it's because people all over the province have shown how resilient and how good they can be, as I referenced earlier. And we need to springboard off of that. And I will talk about that theme as we go through this. Going down to the bottom center, building permits. So that has, as you can see, it's 107% of the level in September of 2019. And that has been mainly buoyed certainly by the last 3 or 4 months. And we've seen that You know, we've had the second best month of the year behind July, with a 29% increase above the level seen last in February. But we know that that's seasonal too. So, but it's taking that into account. So we are compared to other provinces, and we're again in mid-pack because a lot of other provinces have seen this, but we have seen people really investing in New Brunswick in their properties. We're seeing you know, renovations, and we've also seen people moving around our province in another aspect. But this is in terms of investment in retail sales. I think people in the building supply areas certainly must have felt this. If you go to the far right on retail sales, so in retail sales, we're actually at 107% again of where it would have been back in September of 2019 or back in February. We're about 43% above the low point that was experienced in April. And you see the big heavy dip there. Now, I know this is a combination of online sales and retail sales. And I'm sure there's more than one retail sales outlet that would say how hard they've been hit. And certainly being in the zone orange right now over the last couple of weeks in the urban areas would be certainly feeling that. But it does say that people are out spending money and looking certainly to invest and keep moving, not just withdraw amongst themselves. And that part is encouraging. One of the areas that have been the hardest hit is certainly in the food service and drinking spaces. And so when you look at that, you can see the steep decline. That's a bottom right-hand slide. And in that case, it's no surprise. That would be your food, beverage, accommodation. That's why we introduced the subsidy, the travel subsidy, in order to get people moving around the province, because we weren't moving outside. And that really had a positive impact. We saw about I think it was around $21 million investment throughout the province, and which resulted in rebates of around $3.2 million to individuals who were traveling. And what was also rewarding about that is people were saying, wow, I didn't know what was in New Brunswick. I had no idea that we had this here. And they traveled all over in all parts. We've extended that through the winter season because we're still in COVID, but we also want to encourage people to move around in our province. And obviously in the northern part of the province where they're usually guaranteed snow, we're hoping to encourage others to take advantage of that, whether it be certainly skiing or snowmobiling, but really let's not lose sight of the winter tourism potential. So the points that I have just gone through here reflect the areas that are key economic kind of recovery statistic. So basically, summarize employment, insolvencies, the small business confidence, building permits, retail sales, and the food and service drinking establishments. So that we actually can keep a real accurate forecast of where we are, where we're going, where we've been, and so we invest and we work appropriately to keep us moving forward. You've heard me say many times we're going beyond COVID. And that's the end of the slide, David. So if we're going to move and so now if we talk about how we keep moving and we have our province go beyond the COVID experience. As Minister Dunn said earlier, ONB has been embracing its new mandate and doing a great job, because our focus is not how we can just distribute a certain amount of money throughout the province. It's how do we help create regional, long-term, sustainable development opportunities. We are going to stay focused on that path, and that's why we get back to our province provincial address in January and move beyond that. We're looking at coming out stronger. We're looking at how we can maintain the tax structure or reduce it. We've been looking at municipal reform, and that's a tax reform. We're looking at, how do we get back on the double taxation program that we were reducing that. But my goal is to have a province when we're done. I've seen a lot of, and I've had these federal discussions about what happens next year. We're a province with 30% transfer payments, and with the economy that has absolutely disappeared in Alberta, you kind of say, okay, where's the money coming from for our country going forward? And where's the money coming from in terms of what we're doing in our province going forward? So we're trying to not spend our way through this, but manage our way through. That has been our goal from the very beginning. And that isn't anything differently than you would do in each of your businesses. So when we look over the last decade, New Brunswick has seen a job growth, but investment in real GDP growth largely depended on public sector investment. In fact, it was a matched portfolio. I don't believe in the philosophy that more public sector spending will continue on a sustainable growth path for our province. I believe we must find the keys to long-term sustainable private sector investment. And that is certainly our goal. We did make some initial moves early on about that protected not only our financial situation, but it allowed us to maintain our credit rating, so we weren't paying more interest. We reduced WorkSafe premiums. We went and focused and continued on a pro-growth agenda and the strategy to close the gap in one generation. Avant la pandémie de la COVID-19, nous étions en bonne voie de rendre la province plus attrayante en améliorant notre code de solvabilité et en traitant la hausse des taux de la cotisation de travail sécuritaire NB. Notre stratégie économique lancée en janvier montre que nous sommes déterminés à combler la carte de prospérité qui existe entre le Nouveau-Brunswick et le reste du Canada. Il est le très bon exemple qui prend forme. Nous faisons des progrès. If we talk about some success stories around the province, what did we hear just recently? What's most exciting was a cut in half of our softwood lumber tariffs. I was very concerned about where that might end with some smaller companies particularly. But to see it cut in half is a big step. We are still going to move forward to get it reduced to zero because our analysis would show this is an unfair tariff at this point as well. But the World Trade Organization ruled that we did not have subsidized pricing. The AG report has gone, they did a huge, the Auditor General did a huge evaluation, came back and said we do not have subsidized pricing. So the evaluation is underway to get the tariffs reduced back to zero. But for now, the market's strong, and this step change is going to be very helpful to companies across the province. We've seen investments coming. I know McCain's are talking and will be expanding their Grand Falls plant, about $80 million. We know that rural internet and connectivity is a huge aspect for future growth. We've seen what New Brunswick TD are doing, placing rural jobs around the province because they've learned that they don't need to be. I've met with different IT organizations, and basically, they're learning. Many people can work from home now, so it's going to be so different. So connectivity is a huge challenge for us. We've met with Bell, we've met with Xplornet, Rogers, and certainly latest on the list, Starlink. And we know that New Brunswick is being assessed right now as there are other areas as to the pilot projects for this could be a game-changing program that would provide internet services anywhere in our province. Recently, the CP Rail announcement in St. John. I think a major change in our transportation logistics. I think it brings a reality to us being the proximity to world markets, to the North American market, to the opportunity there is great for us in New Brunswick to have that, and it's great to see them coming here and focusing on New Brunswick. Just recently, LARC, a major development of health technology, has decided to set up its East Coast operations here in New Brunswick and looking at our innovation in that world right in Tucker Park. I've seen the Mrs. Unser Donuts. I mean, they invested $4.5 million. COVID didn't stop them in how they're expanding their growth. But it tells us about our whole broader future technology requirements for the food sector. And that is very much of a focus. Many of you may have heard me talk about the apple grower and the investment in the northeastern New Brunswick, in the Bouctouche area. And they will be the largest exporter of apples by 2025 from Canada and into Europe. And when they first invested here on their own initiative, basically said it wouldn't work in New Brunswick. I think we're changing the culture here. I think we're changing it from one that, it won't work in New Brunswick, to one, you know what? We can do that in New Brunswick. And that to me is what's exciting. We've talked about the SMR technology future in energy development. I mean, we'll continue to focus on renewables with wind and solar, but it'll never meet the energy demands of the world. It can be our next opportunity for being a world supplier of energy, neutral, zero carbon emissions. And the federal government in the economic updates certainly referenced the SMR technology, the cluster aspect, and certainly New Brunswick as being right in the forefront of this. You know, there are projects in the north that will be announced in the next few weeks to months that are exciting too, to get kind of a rejuvenation back in an area that's been hit so hard over the last few years. You know, an example I want to use here is a philosophical one that I guess I've exercised from the beginning. I mean, there would be those that would think I don't have a great relationship with the federal government, and I'm here to, well, I won't dispute it totally, but I will certainly say that we have a wonderful relationship for open debate and discussion. And during COVID, I was on I could call Christy Freeland at any time and would get a response from her within hours, or if not minutes. And we would talk about things that we needed in New Brunswick. Very receptive and very helpful. Minister LeBlanc, we have worked through a number of areas that are focused for New Brunswick. And certainly the vaccine, which he's in charge of, we've talked about that rollout and how that's going to work. We've gone through the areas of the SMRs and the support there, which there will be an announcement from the federal government and a joint announcement with the provincial government in our support there for an SMR cluster. We've talked about the flexibility in infrastructure spending. So for me, it's all related to spending money on what we need in our province to ensure that we can maintain or reduce our current level of taxation. So I don't want to tax more dollars to the people in the province. I want to give people a reason to stay here and invest here. So flexibility is what I've asked for in current programs that mean something to New Brunswick, not a program that has been designed by Ottawa. And I guess if I used an example, it would be in the speech that we just heard. And it's related to the standards of healthcare and seniors care and the money being invested to do that. And I agree with understanding the standards, but we haven't had the same challenges as other provinces in that sector. And that goes greatly to the people operating our facilities and the quality of workers in the systems they put in place. So let's not look at a building program that basically says, well, we'll just build more nursing homes and we need to build them all to the standard, because ideally people don't want to be in a nursing home anyway. They'd like to be in their home as long as they can. So our goal is trying to provide better services to people living where they live and to put our money in that service level and to raise that bar, not just build another building. So often infrastructure spending is something you can cut a ribbon on. Well, maybe I can't cut a ribbon on someone delivering service to a senior who needs it. But to me, that is a more valuable aspect of the quality of life that they deserve going forward. I was talking about a bit about how we've changed the philosophy and structure. So I talked about the flexibility, but I also want to touch on what it means in real terms. So many of you have heard me over the past talk about Bacaracat in the shipyard. And so there was a shipyard that was started up purely on government money. I think the initial investment was like 50 million. Said, well, we'll build a ferry and then we'll build something else. And remember, the something else was a floating dry dock. Now it's actually working in St. John right now over on the west side. It's Pomelo that actually owned it. But my surprise was when I went to the facility is that here was a project and I said, so what is this? And because I recognized it as a floating dry dock, but who's this for? And I was told, well, this is a project for the province of New Brunswick. I said, what's the province of New Brunswick doing building a floating dry dock? And well, they were trying to create some work here in the area, so they built a dry dock. And it's a 25-year lease. Well, I said, well, what kind of a deal is that where we try to invent projects to make it look like, we're busy? And so, yes, we own a dry dock. It's sitting out there in the harbor right now. It's on lease to Pomelo for the next 25 years. But here's where Bacaracat stands today. We sold the facility to a private company, MQM. They now have 40 people working full-time and they're generating private sector investment. When Grupo Shine were there before, they didn't have one single private item on their workload. So no work was being sought from them. And they have a couple of shipyards in Quebec. So the dry dock was planned to go back to Quebec and be used there, or any projects that they might be able to lease out to, in this case, Pomelo for the St. John project. But my point is simple that, so here's a private sector, they're looking for work, they have sustainable employment, and it's exciting to see. And so what we have there, and I met with them, I was there a couple of months ago, back when we could travel a little more freely in the province. And they showed me a project they were building on bridge work for Quebec. And I said, well, this is great. You've got other work. She said, and they told me, you know what? We can't do this project, or we couldn't build this structure for the province of New Brunswick. And I questioned, well, why? And they said, well, because it won't meet the specifications for bridges in New Brunswick. Now, isn't that a strange situation to be in, that we can build for a bridge in Quebec, but we can't build for a bridge in New Brunswick? So I committed to looking into that and correcting that. And it goes through looking at other aspects of New Brunswick first, which is a philosophy we've certainly adopted. So, and I know staying in touch, something that Minister Dunn will be focused on going forward, is the Minister Advisory Council. We want a formalized process, not, another summit and all this stuff, but it's having ability to stay in touch with businesses throughout the province, so we can continue to understand what are their challenges and how can we recognize them directly. But government can't do this alone. But we can act as facilitators, as connectors. And we need to work with the business to allow them to step up to do that. OMB surveyed 68 clients to understand what opportunities might exist to buy more from one another, and uncovered nearly 200 million of opportunities just to get our companies talking to each other, buying from each other, and New Brunswick actually making contracts that were right-sized for New Brunswick companies, and doing the same thing here in government, buying from each other. So the focus of any advisory council would be to continue that connectivity, to ensure that we could maximize our ability to support one another, just as we've seen through COVID. So right today, I think we have an opportunity in New Brunswick like we haven't had for a long time. We have confidence in our province. We have a recognition of New Brunswick can do. We have an interest from outside investors to focus and work here. And so we need to just kind of reimagine just how good we can be. We have great economic indicators of how we're recovering from COVID. We have real estate hitting record levels, properties being sold online, sight unseen, and bidding wars, which I don't know when the last time we had a bidding war for properties in our province, but it isn't something that I recall being a big issue. So the time for us to seize to reinvent New Brunswick is now. I think the reputation we built, we can continue with. And that's why I think we have such a focus on let's listen to each other, let's understand the real problems and the real barriers, and let's start to fix each one in a reasonable way. So we're listening, we're responding with real information, real targets of what works. I talk about understanding the problem before inventing the solution. Nous établissons des objectifs réels pour des résultats réels dans la somme de nos gouvernements. You've asked for better procurement for local businesses, launched SNB First strategy, the first NB First procurement strategy. And we had an exemption policy on our international trade or provincial trade that allowed us to look at least 10 contracts. And the total value is about $10 million, so about $1 million each. How many contracts have we lost for pennies? And it's gone to an outside competitor. We have that, and we never used it. We're using it now, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be competitive. It doesn't mean that we're going to pay more. It's going to mean we're going to be focused on how we ensure our companies are competitive, but can do contracts in doing so. The best value approach, it's always been consistent. Best value, lowest cost, but we look at the whole picture. We want to record kind of a scoring mechanism. So we look at what's being invested in the province by these companies. So how many people are working here? So it's a big factor, not just a bottom line number. On the population growth, we're being more aggressive. I mentioned earlier on, I believe, and Minister Dunn did about immigration. We've got behind through COVID. We have many of the immigration files that are set in Ottawa, which we're discussing with Minister Lalonde, and I'm confident we'll get some action there because through the COVID thing, things have gotten slowed down. But proactively, one of the things, a really bright shining star, is engaging international students, but to support a pathway of residency through work permit. So in other words, a full package. Students come here, they train here, and then they have a work to go in. And 2 years ago, we had a target of 200. Today, that number is running around 496. And we hope to be over 500 this year. And we think we can move that to 1,000. So that's people who come here initially to study, but they know when they come, they'll have a path to full-time employment and residency. And connecting the dots is so important. ONB also was dealing directly with companies through navigators. 4,600 calls year to date, and helping businesses to grow. 98% satisfaction in the response and the reactions that were followed up on as a result of these calls. We're looking at wait times. You know, many of you may know about the hip and knee surgery in St. Joe's and St. John. So they were doing, just prior to this last little outbreak, they were doing about 20 a week. And that on that track, we're set to reduce the wait times for hip and knee replacement surgery by 50%. And so we've had wait times as high as 3 years. We're going to reduce them by 50% by March 31st of 2021. And we'll get down to a 6-month level, which is the national standard, by October of 2021. We're doing the same thing with primary care access. We have about 34,000 patients that do not have access. And I could talk about, well, and many say, well, we just need to hire more doctors. Well, you know, hiring more doctors is not necessarily an option because they aren't available. And I could say here, I could give you half a story, and it probably wouldn't be the first time you've heard half a story. I could say we hired 94 new doctors last year. But then I could tell you the rest of the story, that we actually lost 104. So we're down 10. Now, lost means it could be a very thing. Retirement, because the demographic swing is going through the medical profession as well. But we're net 10 lower. Innovation in healthcare through nurse practitioners, through actually greater access to pharmacists for routine prescriptions and things that they can handle. That's what we're focused on. But the number we're going to reduce, so looking at access to primary care, reduce that from 34 down to 16,000, or reduce it by 16,000, again, by March 31st of 2021. That is our goal. You've asked for strength of supports in mental health, and we know COVID has played a big role in the challenges there. Our target is 50% of high priority cases will get treatment within the national benchmark of 10 days. So I'm excited about the focus, and we focus in several areas. To get strong on illicit drugs, on prevention, on treatment, and enforcement. And mental health and how we manage this is a huge issue that has grown exponentially. The police force will tell us that 50% of all crimes in New Brunswick today, weapons-related crimes, are related to crystal meth. And how many communities, small communities, would you be able to go in and talk to a neighbor there, and they would tell you where the local drug house was? And so if that is a possibility and everybody knows it, it's time that we dealt with it. And that is certainly our goal. So I'm about to stop talking, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate, there's so many reasons right now why we can be excited in a pandemic. We can be excited about a vaccine and getting out of the pandemic, but we can be excited about what we've learned in our through managing this crisis. We can be excited about the tremendous cooperation I've seen from one department to another, how we've changed our working relationships with departments, how we've changed our working relationships between Vitality and Horizon, and how we're looking, just as we're doing in St. John on these, where can we have that in any hospital in the province, that focus on some other discipline that allows us to make an improvement in our delivery of service. But there is a huge opportunity for us. Je suis tellement optimiste et ce qui concerne le potentiel de notre province. So I would like to stop here, and I think I'm relatively on schedule, to talk about some questions you have, some advice you may want to give me, and anything in relation to our federal provincial discussions we've had of late as we work through the vaccine issue, but as we work to get back on track in growing our economy, not back to where we were, but well beyond to where we've been. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Premier Higgs. We do have a number of questions that have come in. A couple of observations. We're really delighted from a business community perspective to see the focus on NB first and putting NB companies first, made in NB, by NB, local. And that's wonderful in helping us to establish our global brand as well. You commented that, going to reinvent New Brunswick. And one thing we always hear from our business members, because we hear that phrase a lot, we've got to reinvent, putting us first for a change, put New Brunswick first for a change. Business community has been supporting this province and pivoted and reinvented itself according to a lot of different scenarios that have occurred. So, the government or the business community really has been supporting government for 200 years. So when we use terms like reinventing New Brunswick, it's not businesses necessarily that need to reinvent themselves, because we're continually pivoting. It's government that needs to reinvent himself. So just a little clarification on what we hear from the business community on that a lot. Anyway, the first question coming back is, do you think that we will be back to green by the end of 2021?
By the end of 2021, yeah, I think that's a real possibility. If our vaccines come out as intended right now in the first quarter of the year, when we can actually get the logistics sorted out and get moving in the vaccination policy, I feel like we will have ample supply of vaccines. I've said that publicly because we have so many suppliers coming into market. I remember we went from a time when masks we had such a shortage in masks, and then it became designer masks. So it's not a shortage. So I think there is a real possibility we could be back to green by the end of 2021.
Wonderful. What can the province do you think, that could help St. John businesses that are struggling?
Well, firstly, when I mentioned about the Navigators program, it's understanding what struggling really means. And I know getting back to, that's why we've tried to stay open. That's why we didn't shut down economically when we went back to an orange. And I know that the restaurant industry has taken the hit hard over this. But the idea was, let's try to keep things moving. Let's keep things running so that day-to-day routine businesses can stay on track. And so that's our goal. But what I've asked is every business actually talk to ONB through the Navigator program to understand their particular situation. I believe that too often it's been like a one size fits all, and just hand out a certain amount of money. But then that all comes back to, how do we finance that going forward? So I want to understand real concerns, and that's how we address what is the impact on that business. And our goal from the very beginning is balancing healthcare with economic continuation. Mm-hmm. And I feel that for the most part, because of our low numbers, we've been able to do that, which has been indicated in our economic dashboard, and that has been relatively successful, notwithstanding some businesses have certainly been hit hard.
Okay, the next question that comes in is that New Brunswick has done a terrific job on the pandemic control side. We're getting close to the time when we really need to focus on economic recovery. With airports in NB still at about 10% of last year's passenger traffic, and will not see financial recovery till more people are allowed to travel, what are the province's plans into terms of enabling such activity?
Well, again, it gets back to the vaccines and being able to open up to the other provinces. I mean, we shut down temporarily the Atlantic bubble, and because of a risk of community transmission, that we expect in the coming days we're going to be back to, getting back to yellow in New Brunswick, and that'll certainly get us. The bubble will come later, so that gives us that transportation there across the country. Looking at what we're seeing, and we're all being faced at going into Christmas. I mean, my kids live in Ontario and Saskatchewan. They're all planning to come home to my mother's 100th birthday, but they won't be coming. We're all affected by this. So do I see air travel opening up in the next weeks or months or through Christmas? No, I don't. And especially what we're seeing across the country. Right now, it's how do we manage this for the airports? I mean, nowhere has it been hit harder than our air travel, and I think 95% reduction. But until people are prepared to fly, and we have a vaccine that is going to make that as safe as possible, I don't think people will be willing to travel much.
Yeah, and that is what our research is indicating as well, is that there's a discomfort with traveling, and the points that you've mentioned there, Premier Higgs, will help to ease the frustration and confusion over the traveling. The next question that we have is, do you have a line of sight on next step funding for SMRs? And for those who on the line, that would be small modular reactors, I assume, in the nuclear world.
Well, yes, I do. In the sense of the conversations we've had today, certainly very positive with the federal government. So when I talk about an announcement there and our discussions with Minister of Law and the Minister of Energy about that investment and in the technologies that we are supporting here, we're looking at an SMR cluster. And yes, I see an announcement coming out on the funding announcement in before Christmas. And that would be basically looking at the next stage of development. Because let's face it, this is something that's not going to start up next year. It's something that is a long-term strategy. That would be a minimum of 5 years before we saw production. But it would be a long-term investment for world energy solutions. But yeah, that's our timeline for the next phase of investment. And then a commitment that's both provincial and federal going beyond that as the technology develops.
Right. That's great news, Premier Higgs. As you know, we have a small cluster here in St. John with Moltex Energy as well as Arc Nuclear too. So very encouraging to hear that. The next question, do you have a plan for poverty reduction strategy? And do you plan to make that a focal point in economic recovery?
Yes, indeed. As I talk about a lot of things that I'd like to get the real stats on. So recently we saw a program, I'll go to Nova Scotia put out a program about capping 2% on the rent increases and non-evictions during the pandemic. So when I was asked, I said, well, I want to understand if that is a problem or not. So the statistics that we got back and just got them yesterday was that, well, in fact, our evictions are way down from 2019 and 2018. So, okay, is there a problem here that's unique or new? But then when you look at the poverty reduction program by itself, and I have asked, so when I talk about understanding the real problem, I have asked and I followed up yesterday on it, which I expect to get in the coming days or week or so, is basically an understanding from businesses around the province. How many vacancies do we have? Where do they exist? And how do we plan to fill them? And then you look at in terms of the money that we invest in the social systems, it's okay, we spend a lot of money, but how many are actually getting traction on helping people in their long-term ability to avoid the kind of generational trap? And where are the needs always being met? And where are we capped in saying that, well, look, with the benefits that are provided in our social system, there will never be an interest to work as such in a private sector. So how do we balance that going forward? And I've asked the departments to give me real information so I can look, because we are spending a lot of money, but yet I find that we're seeing in communities, I know we're hearing a lot from Moncton, that certainly homelessness is becoming a major, major factor. We know that the issues that Rich mentioned about crystal meth is a huge impact in our communities. But the program is doing something different, not doing more of the same. So many times we treat the symptom. We do not find the root cause and start working on that.
Thank you. I have one final question, and it has to do with the healthcare system. You've already addressed plans to bringing wait times down for surgeries. From personal experience, I know that it's 3 years in some cases for these. So people that are living in constant pain are going to be really pleased to hear that. The next question has to do with improving the collaboration between our two health authorities. And we have seen some movement going on in that area, but how do you plan to sort of encourage and support more collaboration going on within the health authorities so they're not such a goat rodeo?
And you're absolutely right. You saw recently through the COVID timeframe, we started up. So I'll go a little history here, and then I'll go into the next steps. When we first went into this pandemic, we met with the health authorities and we talked about our availability of hospitals. And at that time, there were 8 different hospitals were going to be identified as COVID hospitals. And you kind of said, well, why would we do that? Well, there's 4 in Vitality and 4 in Horizon. Well, why would we do that? I mean, we're even talking about 2 in Moncton being COVID hospitals. Well, why would we do that? So then it was like we were talking about protective equipment, like clothing, I'm talking. So be masks or anything that will be used in the healthcare facilities. So we talked about, okay, we need to identify exactly what's required, and then we need to source it so that we can have it available to all of our healthcare workers. It took about 2 weeks and 24 signatures to approve the protective equipment to be worn. And so you say, we'll never manage anything if it's going to take us 2 weeks just to decide on what we're going to wear. So then we started this task force, which was basically comprised of just a couple individuals from Vitality and a couple individuals from Horizon. And they worked with public health, and it was a very small team working with the civil service in order to deliver answers to each question in a very timely fashion. And that's what happened. But we saw unprecedented cooperation. You recently read an article from a retiring CEO, Sir Lang Teng, about the opportunity he had or saw in the system to avoid duplication. We have competed St. John with Moncton, Moncton with St. John for Fredericton. Well, if they've got one, we want one. I've been very vocal, very open. I don't care where it is. If it's a service that we can provide and we can get it somewhere else, in terms of they can be a center here, we can be a center somewhere else. So I think that I have said that very clearly. I am not interested in duplication, and I'm understanding in the system where duplication exists and how we start focusing on how good we can be, not how many times we can repeat the same thing in different communities.
I see applause coming from a few people, so I guess people are really glad to hear that. Now, one final question, and it's kind of a biggie too, and I feel like I'm kind of stepping in the middle of a mud puddle on this one, but it basically is thoughts on the airport situation.
So I know for many years, we've all talked about, well, okay, what are any of the barriers to success we have? Now, I don't know if airports are or not, but we also talked about, well, why do people drive to Bangor for flights? Why are they going to Halifax for flights? What connections can we improve upon, and is it possible? The quote that the numbers I used in the throne speech, basically 4.5 million passengers come through Halifax. Now, there may be all kinds of reasons for that, and we'll determine that. But we only have less than 1.5 million, I think it's 1.2, 1.3, coming through all of our provincial airports combined, the three major airports combined, not all of our airports, but the three major ones. So you say, well, why do people not fly from New Brunswick airports? What is the reason? So typically it turns into an emotional discussion rather than a factual one. So all I've committed to do is let's understand how good a transportation network we can have here. And maybe it's a factor too, where we compete with each other in airports unnecessarily. Because, I know the argument, well, it's federal jurisdiction, Higgs has no right to be here. Well, if you look at the amount of money that the provincial government spends as well in each airport, because, well, I put in a new parking lot, well, then you need to put in a new parking lot. And then it becomes, I need to extend the runway, well, then you need to extend the runway. So it goes on and on and on. So what I've said is, let's just lay it right out there. Let's do a very independent analysis. And at the end of the day, it'll speak for itself. Maybe it'll change nothing, but at least we'll end this discussion about how good we can be, because maybe we're already there. But I'm not afraid to look in any aspect of what we do, of how good we can be, because we have allowed this kicking down the road of sensitive questions for too long.
Wonderful. That's the last question we had, Premier Higgs. I really want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. You covered a lot of ground, some wonderful points, and we're very encouraged by what we are hearing. I would like to also mention for everybody on the line that because you referenced CFIB, we also have Atlantic Impressions coming out through the Atlantic Chamber of Commerce, looking for data and information on things as well. So a little plug for the Atlantic Chamber of Commerce on that. Once again, thank you so much to all of your staff as well, Louis Legier and everyone in your office. They're wonderful to work with. Minister Dunn, thank you as well for attending and speaking with us. We're delighted and we're looking forward to continue to work with us. I would like to take this opportunity as well to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas. It'll be a very different Christmas for us and for everyone this year in our province. And all we can ask is stay safe, stay well, shop local and shop safe. Everyone, thank you and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Merry
Thank you. Bye-bye.